Blood stained the Wyoming dust as Evelyn Harper pressed her trembling hands against the wound in her side, knowing these would be her final moments. The outlaws circled like vultures, their laughter cutting through the desert wind as she clutched the empty derringer that had failed to save her. No rescue was coming. No mercy existed in this God-forsaken wilderness. She had traveled 2,000 miles for a future that never existed, and now she would die alone in the dirt, another forgotten soul swallowed by the brutal frontier. Then, a rifle crack split the air, and everything changed. If you want to see how Evelyn survives the impossible and reshapes her destiny in the lawless West, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach had been burning for 20 minutes when Evelyn Harper realized she was going to die. The realization came not with panic, but with a strange crystalline clarity that seemed to slow time itself. She could see every detail. The way the black smoke twisted against the impossibly blue Wyoming sky, the dark stains spreading across the sand where the driver and guard had fallen, the casual way the youngest outlaw was rifling through a dead woman's carpet bag, tossing her belongings into the wind like they meant nothing at all. Because they didn't. Not out here. Not anymore. Evelyn's fingers found the derringer hidden in the folds of her traveling dress, the small pistol her father had pressed into her hands the day she left Philadelphia. "The frontier is no place for a woman alone," he'd said, his weathered face tight with worry. "But I know I can't stop you from chasing this teaching position. Just promise me you'll be careful." She'd promised. She'd lied. The derringer held 2 shots. She'd fired them both at the first man who'd grabbed her, the one with the scar running from his eye to his jaw. The first shot had gone wide, disappearing into the vast emptiness. The second had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a curse that would have made her mother faint. It had bought her maybe 30 seconds to run. Now she crouched behind a cluster of rocks 50 yards from the burning wreckage, her fine traveling dress torn and filthy, her carefully pinned hair falling in tangles around her face. Her side burned where something, a bullet, a piece of flying debris, had torn through the fabric and carved a hot line across her ribs. Blood seeped warm and wet against her corset, and every breath felt like broken glass in her lungs. 4 men remained from the gang that had ambushed the coach. She'd counted them carefully, the way her brother had taught her to count cards during those forbidden games in the library back home. "Knowledge is survival," Thomas had always said. "Know your enemies better than they know themselves." The scarred man was down, clutching his shoulder and screaming curses. That left 4 active threats. "Come on out, teacher lady." The voice belonged to their leader, a tall man with a black hat and eyes like chips of flint. "Ain't nowhere to run. This desert goes on for miles in every direction, and you got no water, no horse, and no hope." He wasn't wrong. Evelyn's throat was already dry as sandpaper, and the sun hung overhead like a malevolent eye, baking the landscape into submission. She had no food, no supplies, no weapon. The derringer lay useless in her hand, a pretty piece of metal that had failed when it mattered most. "We ain't gonna hurt you," another voice called out, younger and somehow more terrifying in its false sweetness. "Just come on out peaceful-like. Maybe we can work something out." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting down the surge of nausea. She knew exactly what they meant by work something out. She'd heard the stories in every stop between Philadelphia and Wyoming, tales of women who'd disappeared into the frontier, never to be seen again. The West devoured people, especially women alone, and spit out nothing but bones and regrets. She thought about her mother, who'd wept when Evelyn announced her intention to accept the teaching position in Clearwater. "You have everything you need here," she'd pleaded. "A good home, society, prospects for marriage. Why would you throw all that away for some wild fantasy?" "Because I'm suffocating," Evelyn had wanted to scream. "Because every day in Philadelphia felt like being buried alive, surrounded by tea parties and calling cards and carefully orchestrated conversations about nothing that mattered. Because I want to matter, to do something real, to breathe air that hasn't been breathed by 1,000 others before me." She hadn't said any of that. Instead, she'd packed her trunk, accepted the teaching contract from Mr. Horace Whitmore of Clearwater, Wyoming, and boarded the westbound train with her head high and her heart hammering with equal parts terror and exhilaration. The teaching position that she now realized had probably never existed at all. The letter had been too perfect, the salary too generous, the descriptions too enticing. A brand new schoolhouse, they'd written, 15 students eager to learn. Students. A comfortable boarding room provided, along with a monthly stipend that would have been generous even in Philadelphia. She'd been a fool, a naive, desperate fool who'd walked straight into a trap. "Last chance, lady." The leader's voice had lost its veneer of patience. "You got to the count of 10, then we come get you. And when we do, things are going to go a whole lot worse for you." Evelyn's hand tightened on the useless derringer. She had no illusions about what was coming. She could stay hidden and die of thirst in this furnace, or she could face them and die faster. Neither option held much appeal, but at least the second one wouldn't drag out for days. 1. The counting began, each number falling like a hammer blow against her remaining seconds of life. 2. She thought about her brother Thomas, who'd always believed in her even when everyone else thought her dreams were foolish. He'd slipped her an extra $50 before she left, money he couldn't spare from his clerk's salary. "For emergencies," he'd whispered. The money was still in her trunk, currently burning with everything else she owned. 3. She thought about Margaret Chen, her closest friend from the women's college, who'd promised to write every week. Would Margaret even know what had happened to her? Would anyone? 4. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at the vast, indifferent landscape. The beauty of it struck her even now, the way the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, the endless sweep of sagebrush and sky, the terrible, magnificent emptiness of it all. This was what she'd come for, this wildness, this freedom. She'd just never imagined it would kill her so quickly. 5. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still, straightened her spine the way her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "A Harper faces death with dignity," she could hear her grandmother saying. "We do not cower." 6. Footsteps crunched on the rocky ground, moving closer. They weren't even bothering to be quiet anymore. Why would they? She was unarmed, alone, injured, a cornered rabbit waiting for the wolves. 7! Evelyn clutched the derringer tighter, knowing it was useless but unable to let it go. It was the last piece of home she had, the last connection to her father's worried face and his desperate attempt to protect her. 8! She could hear them laughing now, confident and cruel. The sound scraped against her nerves like broken glass. 9! Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the spike of pain in her side. If she was going to die, she would do it standing. She would look them in the eye and refuse to give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. The leader came around the rock formation with his gun drawn, that cold smile playing at his lips. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't you a pretty—" The rifle shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a crack that split the air and sent the leader stumbling backward with a hole in his hat. He hit the ground cursing, scrabbling for cover, and suddenly the desert exploded with gunfire. Evelyn dropped back behind the rocks, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Another shot rang out, then another, each one precise and deliberate. She couldn't see the shooter, couldn't tell where the shots were coming from, but the outlaws were scattering like startled crows, diving for cover and returning fire at some target she couldn't identify. "There's someone on the ridge," one of them shouted. "North side." More shots. The sharp tang of gunpowder drifted on the hot air. Someone screamed, high and terrified, then went silent. Evelyn pressed herself flat against the rock, making herself as small as possible. She didn't know who was shooting or why, but she understood with perfect clarity that she was trapped in the middle of a gunfight with no weapon and no protection. Bullets whined past overhead, ricocheting off stone, and she could hear the outlaws shouting to each other in panic. "How many are there?" "I can't see. The sun's—" Another shot. A wet, choking sound, the acrid smell of blood mixing with dust. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed felt unnatural, oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the still-burning stagecoach and someone's ragged breathing nearby. "Anyone alive?" a voice called out. Not one of the outlaws. This voice was different, deeper, harder. No response. Evelyn stayed frozen, barely breathing. Minutes crawled past. The sun beat down mercilessly. Her side throbbed with each heartbeat, and she could feel the sticky warmth of blood spreading beneath her dress. She needed to do something, apply pressure, find water, get help. But terror had locked her muscles in place. The sound of boots on rock made her flinch. Someone was approaching, moving with careful, deliberate steps. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the empty derringer, though what good it would do her now she couldn't imagine. A shadow fell across her hiding place. "You can come out," the voice said. Still hard, but not cruel. "They're gone." Evelyn didn't move. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, stay silent, stay small. "Ma'am." A pause. "I saw you get hit. You're bleeding. You stay out here in this heat without treatment. You'll be dead by nightfall." Slowly, hands shaking, Evelyn peered around the edge of the rock. The man standing 10 feet away looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the landscape. Tall and lean, with shoulders that suggested hard work and harder living. His face was weathered and unreadable beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, stubble darkening his jaw. Dark eyes swept over her with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. The torn dress, the blood, the useless gun in her trembling hand. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, the barrel pointed at the ground. The other hand rested near the pistol at his hip, but he made no move to draw it. "Name's Cade Lawson," he said. His voice carried the flat, economical tone of a man who didn't waste words. "I've got a ranch about an hour's ride from here. You need medical attention, and you need it now." Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. She managed only a small, pathetic sound that made her want to crawl into the earth and disappear. Cade's eyes narrowed slightly. "Can you walk?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then come on. We don't have time to waste." He turned and started walking toward a horse tied to a scraggly tree 50 yards away. Just walked away, as if he expected her to follow without question. Evelyn remained frozen for another moment, her mind racing. This man had just killed. How many? 3? 4? People with the kind of precision that spoke of long practice. He could be anyone, want anything. Following him could be just another form of suicide. But staying here was certain death. She pushed herself to her feet, gasping as pain lanced through her side. The world tilted dangerously, and she had to brace herself against the rock to keep from falling. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Cade was already at his horse, checking the saddle. He didn't look back. Evelyn took one step, then another. Each movement sent fresh agony through her ribs, and the ground seemed determined to shift beneath her feet. She made it perhaps 20 feet before her legs gave out entirely. She didn't remember hitting the ground. One moment she was standing, fighting to keep moving, and the next she was staring up at the merciless blue sky with no memory of falling. Bootsteps approached. Cade's face appeared above her, still unreadable. He crouched down, and for the first time something that might have been concern flickered across his features. "How bad is it?" he asked. "I don't—" Evelyn's voice came out as a rasp. "I don't know." Without asking permission, Cade pulled back the torn fabric of her dress, examining the wound with clinical efficiency. His hands were surprisingly gentle despite their obvious calluses. "Bullet grazed you," he said. "Messy, but not fatal if we clean it proper. You lose much more blood, though, and we'll have a problem." He stood and walked back to his horse, returning moments later with a canteen and a piece of cloth that might once have been a shirt. He uncapped the canteen and held it to her lips. "Drink, slow." The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most beautiful thing Evelyn had ever experienced. She gulped greedily until Cade pulled it away. "I said slow. You drink too fast after being parched, you'll just bring it back up." He poured some of the water onto the cloth, then pressed it firmly against her side. Evelyn gasped at the contact, but Cade's other hand came up to steady her shoulder. "I know it hurts, but we need to stop the bleeding before we move you." "Who?" Evelyn struggled to focus through the pain. "Who were they?" "Turner gang." Cade's jaw tightened. "Been running wild through this territory for 3 months, hitting stagecoaches, small ranches, anyone who can't fight back. Law hasn't been able to touch them. And you just—" She gestured vaguely at the bodies scattered across the sand. "Just happened to be tracking them. Pure luck, I heard the gunfire." He secured the makeshift bandage with practiced efficiency. "Can you ride?" Evelyn almost laughed. Ride? She could barely sit up. But she nodded anyway, because what choice did she have? Cade studied her for a moment, then stood and walked back to his horse. He returned leading the animal, a sturdy bay gelding that eyed Evelyn with what seemed like skepticism. "This is going to hurt," Cade warned. Then, before she could brace herself, he'd lifted her from the ground and placed her in the saddle with a strength that belied his lean build. The world spun violently. Evelyn grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, fighting down the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. Cade swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to steady her. "Lean back. I've got you." It was the most intimate contact Evelyn had ever had with a man who wasn't family, and under different circumstances she might have protested. But consciousness was already slipping through her fingers like water, and she found herself sagging against his chest with no strength to resist. "Stay awake," Cade ordered, his voice rumbling through his chest into her back. "Talk to me. Where were you headed?" "Clear water." The word came out slurred. "Clearwater? That's 60 miles north of here. What business you got there?" "Teaching position?" Even through the fog of pain, bitter irony colored her voice. "Except I don't think it was real." A pause. "What makes you say that?" "Too good. Too perfect." Her head lolled back against his shoulder. "Nobody wants Eastern teachers out here." "Hey." Cade's arm tightened around her waist. "Stay with me. What's your name?" "Evelyn?" "Evelyn Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, you're right. That teaching position wasn't real." The words cut through the fog like a blade. "What?" "Horace Whitmore died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. His son's been running scams ever since, advertising fake jobs, getting women to wire money for travel expenses, then disappearing. Marshals have been after him, but he stays one step ahead." The implications crashed over Evelyn like a wave. Everything. The careful planning, the borrowed money, the tearful goodbyes, the burning bridges. All of it for a lie. She'd walked willingly into a trap, so desperate for escape that she'd ignored every warning sign. "I'm such a fool," she whispered. "You're alive. That's more than most can say after meeting the Turner gang." Cade urged the horse into a steady walk. "We'll get you patched up at my place. After that, we'll figure out what comes next." Evelyn wanted to ask what he meant. Wanted to protest that she could figure out her own future. Wanted to maintain some shred of dignity. But darkness was pulling at her with insistent hands, and she was so very tired of fighting. The last thing she remembered before consciousness fled entirely was the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the unexpected warmth of being held by someone who didn't want anything from her except that she stay alive. When Evelyn woke, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling. It was made of rough wooden planks, stained dark with age and smoke, and it seemed to be moving in a slow, nauseating circle above her head. She stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand why she was lying down when she should be... Should be what? Where was she supposed to be? Memory returned in fragments. The stagecoach, the fire, blood in the dust, a man with cold eyes and a rifle who'd killed with the precision of someone who'd done it before. Cade Lawson. Evelyn tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded across her ribs, sharp enough to steal her breath and bring tears to her eyes. "Easy." The voice came from somewhere to her left. "You tear those stitches, and I'll have to sew you back up again." Wasn't pleasant the first time. She turned her head carefully and found Cade sitting in a rough wooden chair next to the bed. A real bed, she realized with some surprise, not a cot or a pile of blankets. He looked exactly as he had before, except he'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Stitches?" Evelyn's voice came out as a croak. Cade gestured to a basin of pinkish water on the small table beside him. "Bullet grays went deeper than I thought. Had to close it up proper. You're lucky. Another inch to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Evelyn looked down and discovered she was wearing a man's shirt several sizes too large, and beneath it, bandages wrapped tight around her ribs. A flush of heat that had nothing to do with fever crept up her neck. "Your dress was ruined," Cade said, correctly interpreting her expression. "Mrs. Chen from the neighboring ranch helped me get you cleaned up and changed. She's the one who did the actual nursing. I just held you still." That should have been reassuring, but somehow the image of being held down while a stranger stitched her flesh made Evelyn's stomach turn. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 8 miles southeast of Clearwater." Cade stood and moved to a window, pulling back a faded curtain to reveal late afternoon light. You've been out for about 6 hours. Mrs. Chen said that's normal. Your body needed rest. Evelyn struggled to process this information. 6 hours. An entire afternoon lost to unconsciousness while she lay in a stranger's bed, helpless and dependent. I need to... She tried again to sit up, moving more carefully this time. The room swam, but stayed mostly stable. I need to go to Clearwater, find the marshal, report what happened. Already sent word. Kay didn't turn from the window. Mrs. Chen's husband rode into town this morning. Marshall knows about the stagecoach, knows about Turner Gang. He'll want your statement, but that can wait until you're stronger. I'm strong enough now. This time Kay did turn, and his expression held something that might have been amusement. You can't stand without falling over, but you're ready to ride 8 miles to give testimony? That's either brave or stupid, Miss Harper, and I haven't decided which. I don't want to be a burden. Little late for that. But his tone wasn't unkind. You're here now. You're injured, and moving you before you're healed would be foolish. You'll stay until Mrs. Chen says you're fit to travel. It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn bristled at the presumption, at being told what she would and wouldn't do by a man she'd known for less than a day. Mr. Lawson, Cade. Mr. Lawson, she repeated firmly, I appreciate your help, truly, but I cannot impose on your hospitality any longer than absolutely necessary. I have no money, no belongings, and no prospects. The teaching position was fraudulent, which means I have no reason to be in Wyoming at all. The proper thing to do is return east as quickly as possible. Cade crossed his arms, leaning back against the windowsill. And how do you plan to pay for that return trip? The question hit like a physical blow. Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The money Thomas had given her was gone, burned with her trunk. She had nothing, literally nothing, except the borrowed shirt on her back and the dubious charity of strangers. She struggled to find words. I'll find work. In Clearwater. Save enough for a train ticket. Doing what? I'm educated. I can read, write, do arithmetic. Surely someone needs a single woman with no references, no family, and no connections? Cade's voice remained neutral, but the words cut deep. In a town where everyone knows everyone's business and gossip spreads faster than wildfire? You'll be lucky if anyone speaks to you, let alone offers you work. Evelyn felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Then what do you suggest I do? Lie here and wait to die of shame? I suggest you heal first, think second. Cade moved away from the window, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. You've been through something most people don't survive. Give yourself time to recover before you start making plans. Time is a luxury I cannot afford. Why? What's waiting for you back east that's so urgent? The question stopped her cold. What was waiting for her? A disappointed family who'd warned her this would happen? A society that would whisper about her failed adventure for years? A future of genteel poverty and carefully managed expectations? Nothing. Nothing was waiting for her except a life she'd already decided she didn't want. Cade watched her face, and something in her expression must have given her thoughts away because his own features softened almost imperceptibly. Get some rest, Miss Harper. We'll talk more when you're stronger. He moved toward the door, and panic fluttered in Evelyn's chest. Wait. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. For saving my life, I haven't said that yet. Cade nodded once, a quick dip of his head. Try to sleep. I'll bring you something to eat in a couple hours. Then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than slamming it would have. Evelyn lay back against the pillow, a real pillow, she noted, not just a folded blanket, and stared at that circling ceiling. Her mind raced despite her body's exhaustion, churning through possibilities and finding only dead ends. She was trapped, not by locked doors or chains, but by circumstance and propriety and the brutal arithmetic of survival. She owed this man her life, and she had no way to repay that debt. Worse, she needed his continued charity to have any hope of what? Going back to Philadelphia with her tail between her legs? Staying in a town where she had no prospects and no reputation? Throwing herself on the mercy of strangers who had no reason to trust her? Every option felt like a different flavor of defeat. Through the window, she could hear the distant sounds of ranch life, chickens clucking, a dog barking, someone chopping wood with steady rhythmic strikes. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the sounds of people who belonged somewhere, who had purpose and place. Evelyn closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She'd been so certain that coming west would give her the freedom she craved, the chance to be something more than what Philadelphia had decided she should be. Instead, she'd found only a different kind of cage with bars made of debt and dependence. The tears came anyway, hot and silent, soaking into the pillow, while the Wyoming sun slanted through the window and painted golden squares on the rough wooden floor. She cried for her foolishness, for her naivety, for every warning sign she'd ignored in her desperate bid for escape. She cried for the people who'd died on that stagecoach, whose names she'd never even learned. She cried for the girl who'd boarded the train in Philadelphia with stars in her eyes and poetry in her heart. That girl was dead now, killed by the same bullet that had grazed Evelyn's ribs. What remained was something new, something harder, something that would have to learn to survive in a world that didn't care whether she did or not. Evelyn woke to the smell of something cooking, meat and vegetables, simple but savory. Her stomach clenched with sudden, desperate hunger. The room had darkened. Through the window she could see the deep purple of twilight, stars beginning to pierce through the fading light. A lantern burned low on the table, casting warm shadows that danced across the walls. Cade sat in the same chair as before, or perhaps he'd returned to it. He held a bowl in his hands, and when he saw her eyes open, he stood. "Hungry?" Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. She felt hollowed out, emptied by crying, but strangely clearer for it, as if the tears had washed away some of the fog that had been clouding her thoughts. Cade helped her sit up, propping her against the wall behind the bed. He handed her the bowl, some kind of stew, chunks of meat and potato in a rich broth, and a spoon. "Eat slow," he advised. "Your stomach's been empty too long. Go too fast and you'll regret it." Evelyn took a small bite and nearly moaned. It wasn't fancy cooking by Philadelphia standards, but after the day she'd had, it tasted like the finest meal she'd ever eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each spoonful. Cade settled back into his chair, watching her with that same unreadable expression. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "How long have you lived here?" Evelyn asked finally, needing to fill the quiet with something other than the sound of her own chewing. 5 years. Bought the place cheap from a widow who wanted to move back to civilization. He gestured vaguely at the walls. It wasn't much when I got it. Still isn't, truth be told. Evelyn looked around the room properly for the first time. It was sparse. A bed, a chair, a small table, a trunk in the corner. No decorations, no personal touches, nothing that spoke of a life being lived versus merely endured. "Do you run it alone?" "Got a ranch hand who comes in during busy seasons, but mostly, yeah, it's just me." "That must be, She searched for the right word. "Lonely." Cade's expression didn't change. "I prefer it that way." The message was clear. Don't pry. Don't ask. Don't make this more personal than it needs to be. Evelyn took another spoonful of stew, chewing slowly while she gathered her thoughts. "Mr. Lawson, Cade, she amended. "I've been thinking about my situation. You were right. I can't go back east with no money, and I can't stay in Clearwater with no prospects, which leaves me in an impossible position." He waited, saying nothing. "So I'd like to propose an alternative." Evelyn set down the bowl, meeting his eyes directly. "Let me work for you, here at the ranch. Whatever needs doing, cooking, cleaning, mending, accounts. I'm educated, organized, and I learn quickly. In exchange for room, board, and a small wage, I'll help you run this place properly." Cade's eyebrows rose slightly. "You want to be my housekeeper?" "I want to be useful rather than helpless." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I want to earn my keep instead of being charity. And frankly, from what I can see of this ranch, you could use someone with organizational skills." A long pause. Then unexpectedly, Cade laughed, a short, rough sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "What's funny?" Evelyn demanded. "You've got spine, Miss Harper. I'll give you that." He shook his head. "But you don't know what you're asking. This isn't some gentleman's estate back east. Ranch work is hard, brutal sometimes, and that's before we even get into what people will say about a single woman living on a bachelor's property. I don't care what people say. You will, when it means no one in town will sell you supplies or speak to you in the street. Cade's voice was flat. Reputation matters out here, maybe more than it does back east. You lose that, you lose everything. I've already lost everything, Evelyn pointed out. What's a little more scandal? Cade studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. You're serious about this? Completely. And when you've saved enough for a train ticket east? What then? The question hung in the air between them. Evelyn realized she didn't have an answer. The future beyond the next few months was a blank space in her mind, too overwhelming to contemplate. I don't know, she admitted, but right now, I need this. Please. The word please seemed to shift something in Cade's expression. He stood, walking to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. You can stay until you're healed, he said finally. After that, we'll see. No promises, Miss Harper. This might not work out the way you're hoping. I understand. I don't think you do. Cade turned back to face her, and in the lamplight his features looked carved from stone. But you'll learn soon enough. He moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start figuring out what comes next. After he left, Evelyn finished her stew in silence, her mind churning with questions she couldn't answer and fears she refused to name. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over the ranch like a blanket, vast and indifferent and full of sounds she didn't recognize. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and wild and free. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened to it sing. Dawn came cold and unforgiving, spilling pale light through the window and dragging Evelyn from restless dreams filled with fire and blood. She woke to find herself alone in the small room, the chair beside the bed empty, Cade's presence reduced to the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Her side ached with a deep, throbbing pain that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Moving carefully, she pushed herself upright and waited for the dizziness to pass. The bandages felt tight against her ribs, and when she glanced down, she could see dark stains seeping through the white cloth. The door opened without warning, and Mrs. Chen appeared carrying a basin of steaming water and fresh bandages draped over her arm. She was a small woman, perhaps 50, with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Good, you're awake, she said briskly, setting the basin on the table. Let me see those stitches. There was no room for argument in her tone. Evelyn submitted to the examination, wincing as Mrs. Chen peeled back the bandages with efficient, practiced movements. Healing well enough, Mrs. Chen pronounced. No infection, which is a miracle considering how long you were out in that heat. Another few days and you'll be able to move around more freely. She began cleaning the wound with a cloth dipped in the warm water. Cade told me what you proposed. Working here. Evelyn tensed. And what do you think of that? I think you're either very brave or very foolish. Mrs. Chen's hands never stopped their careful work. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Harper. Out here, a woman's reputation is all she has. You live on a bachelor's ranch, people will talk. They'll assume things, ugly things. Let them talk. Mrs. Chen's eyes flicked up to meet hers. You say that now. Wait until the shopkeeper won't sell you fabric, or the ladies at church cross the street to avoid you, or some drunk cowboy thinks you're fair game because clearly you must be that kind of woman. The words hit harder than Evelyn wanted to admit. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Mrs. Chen began wrapping fresh bandages around Evelyn's ribs, her movements gentle despite the firmness of her words. You could come stay with my husband and me. We've got a spare room. It wouldn't be charity. I could use help with the washing and mending. My hands aren't what they used to be. For a moment, Evelyn was tempted. The offer represented safety, respectability, a chance to salvage some shred of her reputation. But it also represented dependence, continued helplessness, being passed from one stranger's charity to another, like a broken thing that needed fixing. Thank you, she said quietly. But no, I need to do this. I need to prove I can survive on my own terms. Mrs. Chen tied off the bandage and sat back, studying Evelyn with an expression that might have been respect or pity or both. You remind me of myself at your age. I came west after the war looking for something I couldn't even name. Thought I could outrun my past, make something new. She stood, gathering the soiled bandages. Just remember, surviving and living are two different things. Don't confuse one for the other. After Mrs. Chen left, Evelyn sat in the empty room and let those words settle over her like dust. Through the window, she could see Cade moving between the barn and the house, carrying buckets of water with the same economical movements he seemed to apply to everything. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned that stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering things better left buried. She understood that impulse more than she wanted to admit. By mid-morning, Evelyn felt strong enough to attempt standing. She made it to her feet using the wall for support, and the room only spun a little. Her legs felt weak as water, but they held. Small victories. She found her ruined dress folded neatly on top of the trunk in the corner. Someone, Mrs. Chen probably, had tried to wash the blood out, but the fabric was beyond saving. Torn, stained, a casualty of violence like everything else she'd brought west with her. A soft knock at the door made her turn too quickly. Pain lanced through her side, stealing her breath. "Miss Harper?" Cade's voice, carefully neutral. "You decent?" "Yes." He entered carrying a bundle of fabric in his arms. "Mrs. Chen left these. Said they belonged to the widow who used to own this place. Might fit you well enough until we can get you proper clothes." He set the bundle on the bed, 2 simple dresses in faded calico, a shawl, some undergarments that made Evelyn flush just looking at them, the clothes of a working woman, practical and plain. "Thank you," she managed. Cade nodded, already turning to leave, but Evelyn found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Why are you helping me?" He paused in the doorway, not looking back. "You needed help." "That's not a reason. People need help all the time. Most folks just ride on by." A long silence stretched between them. When Cade finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. "Maybe I'm tired of riding by." Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with questions that had no answers and a pile of dead woman's clothes that smelled faintly of lavender and old dreams. She dressed slowly, her movements hampered by pain and unfamiliarity with the simple fastening so different from her Philadelphia finery. The dress hung loose on her frame. The widow had been a larger woman, but it was clean and whole, and that was more than Evelyn had any right to expect. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, moving carefully and using the wall for support, she found herself in a main room that was somehow both larger and more depressing than she'd imagined. The space held a rough wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs, a cast-iron stove that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months, and shelves lined with dusty supplies in no discernible order. Dirty plates were stacked in a basin by the pump, and the floor looked like it hadn't seen a proper sweeping since the widow left 5 years ago. "It's not much," Cade said from where he stood by the stove, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "But it's dry, and it keeps the wind out, which is more than some can say." Evelyn surveyed the chaos with a practiced eye, her mother's training kicking in despite everything. "When was the last time you organized those shelves?" "Organized?" Cade handed her the coffee. "I know where everything is. That's organized enough. You have flour next to gun oil, coffee beans mixed with nails. Is that a dead mouse in the corner?" Cade glanced over. "Huh. Wondered where he'd gone." Evelyn set down the coffee cup with a sharp click. "If I'm going to work here, the first thing we're doing is cleaning this place properly. I can't cook in a kitchen where rodents go to die." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Cade's face. "You can barely stand up without looking like you might faint, but you want to clean my kitchen." "I want to be useful, and your kitchen is offensive." She moved toward the shelves, ignoring the protest from her ribs. "Where do you keep the cleaning supplies?" "Don't have any." Evelyn turned to stare at him. "You don't have soap, rags, anything?" "Got soap for washing up." Cade gestured vaguely toward the basin. "Never saw the point in anything fancier." "The point," Evelyn said slowly, as if explaining to a particularly dim child, "is that filth breeds disease, disease breeds death. And I didn't survive getting shot just to die of whatever plague is growing in your pantry." This time Cade definitely smiled, a quick flash of teeth that transformed his stern features into something almost boyish. Yes, ma'am. I'll ride into town this afternoon. Get whatever supplies you need. Make a list. I can remember. Make a list anyway. Evelyn pulled out one of the chairs and sat down before her legs could give out. Lye soap, scrub brushes, rags for cleaning, proper storage containers, and while you're at it, get some decent coffee. Whatever you're drinking tastes like dirt. It is dirt, mostly. But Cade was already pulling out a scrap of paper and a stub of pencil, writing in careful, blocky letters. Anything else, Your Majesty? Food that isn't stew. Flour, sugar, salt, eggs if they're fresh, vegetables that haven't fossilized, and fabric. Plain cotton will do. I'll need to make some proper clothes. Cade's pencil paused. You know how to sew? I'm a woman, Mr. Lawson. Of course I know how to sew. Evelyn took a sip of the terrible coffee and tried not to grimace. My mother made sure I could embroider, do needlepoint, and create entire wardrobes from nothing but determination and spite. It was the one practical skill she taught me. Why spite? The question caught her off guard. Evelyn found herself answering before she could think better of it. Because she was angry. At the world. At my father. At herself for marrying a man who valued books more than money. She took that anger and channeled it into making sure her children could survive on appearances even when there was nothing behind them. She set down the cup. Turns out she was right to worry. Cade finished his list and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'll head into Clearwater after I finish morning chores. Should be back by evening. I'm coming with you. No, you're not. Evelyn straightened in her chair, ignoring the pain the movement caused. I need to speak with the marshal. Give my statement about the attack. Marshal can come here if he needs your statement that badly. Cade's voice was firm. You're not healed enough for an 8-mile ride, and I'm not explaining to Mrs. Chen why I let you tear your stitches being stubborn. I'm not an invalid. You're not fully recovered either. Cade moved to the door, grabbing his hat from a peg on the wall. Stay here. Rest. If you absolutely must be useful, you can sit in that chair and sort the supplies on the bottom shelf. Just the bottom one. Anything higher and you'll be reaching, and reaching will pull your stitches. Before Evelyn could protest further, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that made argument pointless. She sat alone in the chaotic kitchen, frustration and helplessness warring in her chest. Through the window, she could see Cade heading toward the barn, his stride long and purposeful. He moved like a man who'd learned to carry the weight of solitude without letting it slow him down. Evelyn looked around the neglected room and made a decision. She might not be able to ride into town or do heavy labor, but she could do this. She could bring order to chaos, impose structure on disorder. It was what she'd been trained for, after all, the careful management of domestic spaces, the subtle art of making a house into a home, even if that home belonged to a stranger who'd saved her life for reasons he wouldn't explain. She started with the bottom shelf as instructed, pulling out each item and setting it on the table. The disorder was almost impressive in its completeness. Boxes of ammunition mixed with bags of dried beans, a jar of honey next to a tin of gun grease, playing cards scattered among fishhooks. It was the accumulated chaos of someone who'd stopped caring about organization years ago. Or maybe someone who'd never learned to care in the first place. Working slowly, pausing when the pain in her side grew too sharp, Evelyn began sorting. Ammunition in one pile, food in another, tools in a third. Simple categories that would make finding things possible instead of an exercise in archaeology. She was halfway through when she found the photograph. It was tucked into an old cigar box along with some letters and a tarnished pocket watch. The image showed a younger Cade standing next to a woman with dark hair and a serious expression. They stood in front of a house, not this one, somewhere else, and neither of them were smiling. Evelyn knew she should put it back, that looking at it was a violation of privacy, but something in the woman's eyes held her attention, a kind of desperate sadness that felt achingly familiar. Find anything interesting? Evelyn jumped, nearly dropping the photograph. Cade stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, she said quickly, setting the picture back in the box. I wasn't trying to pry, it was just there, and That was my wife. Cade's voice was flat. She died 3 years ago. Fever took her in the space of a week. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that had calcified into something harder than sorrow. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said again, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't be. You didn't know." Cade moved to the table and picked up the cigar box, closing it with a deliberate care that somehow hurt to watch. "I should have put this away properly. My fault for leaving it where you could find it. She was beautiful. She was angry." Cade set the box on a high shelf, out of reach. "Angry at me for bringing her out here, angry at the land for being so hard, angry at herself for not being strong enough to survive it." He turned back to Evelyn. "We had 6 months together before the fever came. 6 months of fighting and silence and regret. Not exactly a love story." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. The rawness in his voice suggested wounds that hadn't healed, might never heal. "Is that why you live alone?" she asked quietly. "Why you don't want help?" "I live alone because it's easier than trying to explain to someone new why I wake up sometimes thinking she's still here." Cade's jaw tightened. "And I don't want help because everyone who tries eventually realizes this place is cursed and leaves. Better to accept that up front than pretend otherwise." "I don't believe in curses." "You should. You're looking at one." Before Evelyn could respond, Cade was moving toward the door again, already putting distance between himself and the conversation. "I'm heading to town now. Should be back by dark. Don't overdo it while I'm gone." Then he was mounting his horse and riding away, leaving Evelyn alone with the ghost of his dead wife and a pile of unsorted supplies that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. She spent the rest of the day working slowly through the chaos, creating order one small section at a time. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, gave her something to focus on besides the impossible tangle of her situation. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she'd managed to organize 3 shelves and clean half the dishes, though the effort had left her exhausted and aching. She was sitting at the table, resting, when Mrs. Chen appeared at the door with a covered basket. "Brought you some supper," the older woman said, setting the basket on the table. "Figured Cade wouldn't think to leave you anything before he rode off." "Thank you." Evelyn pulled back the cloth to reveal bread, cheese, and sliced ham. Her stomach growled audibly. Mrs. Chen settled into one of the chairs, her sharp eyes taking in the organized shelves and cleaned dishes. "Been busy, I see. I needed to be useful." "Or you needed to stop thinking." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. "Hard work's good for that. Keeps the ghosts quiet for a while." Evelyn took a bite of bread, chewing slowly. "Did you know his wife?" "Margaret? A little. She wasn't here long enough for anyone to know her well." Mrs. Chen's expression grew distant. "Pretty thing from back east, Virginia, I think. Met Cade when he was working on her father's ranch, fell hard and fast, and convinced him to marry her and take her west where they could build something of their own. He said she was angry. Angry doesn't cover it. She was furious." Mrs. Chen sighed. She'd romanticized the frontier, thought it would be adventures and freedom. Instead, she got isolation and hardship, and a husband who worked himself to exhaustion trying to make this place profitable. The reality broke something in her, I think. By the end, she wasn't just sick with fever. She was sick of living. The words painted a picture Evelyn didn't want to see. A woman who'd chased a dream west only to find it was a nightmare, who died not just from disease but from the slow crushing weight of disappointment. "Do you think she would have left him?" Evelyn asked. "If she'd lived?" "I think she already had, in every way that mattered." Mrs. Chen met Evelyn's eyes. "Which is why you need to be careful. Cade's carrying guilt that isn't his to carry, convinced he killed her by bringing her here. He won't let anyone close because he's terrified of failing them the same way. You stay here. You'll be fighting that ghost as much as you'll be fighting the land. I'm not trying to replace her. Aren't you? Young woman shows up needing saving, proposes to make his house a home, starts organizing and cleaning and doing all the things Margaret never could manage." Mrs. Chen's voice wasn't unkind, but it was brutally honest. "You might not mean it that way, but that's how it'll look. To him, to the town, to everyone watching." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Then what should I do?" "That's your choice to make. I'm just telling you the lay of the land so you can make it with open eyes." Mrs. Chen stood, gathering her empty basket. "I'll be back tomorrow to check your stitches. Try not to kill yourself with cleaning before then." After she left, Evelyn sat alone in the gathering darkness, watching shadows lengthen across the floor she'd swept clean. The room felt different now, still sparse, still rough, but no longer quite so abandoned. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. Outside, a horse whinnied. Moments later, Cade appeared in the doorway carrying sacks of supplies. He stopped when he saw the organized shelves and clean kitchen, surprise flickering across his features. "You were supposed to rest." "I did rest, in between organizing." Evelyn stood, moving to help unload the supplies, but Cade waved her off. "Sit. I've got it." He began unpacking soap, brushes, the items from her list plus others she hadn't thought to ask for. "Marshall sends his regards. Says he'll come by in a day or two to get your statement. No rush?" "What did you tell him about me being here?" Cade's hands paused in their unpacking. "The truth. That you were injured in the attack, that Mrs. Chen's looking after you, that you'll be staying until you're healed enough to make other arrangements." "And what did he say to that?" "He said Wyoming's no place for a woman alone, and you're lucky I found you when I did." Cade resumed unpacking, his movements deliberate. He didn't ask about anything else, and I didn't offer. They worked in silence for a while, Evelyn directing where things should go while Cade put them away. It felt almost domestic, this quiet cooperation, and Evelyn found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, despite everything Mrs. Chen had said. "I found fabric," Cade said eventually, pulling out a length of dark blue cotton. "The shopkeeper's wife helped me pick it. Said it was practical, but not too plain." Evelyn ran her fingers over the material. It was simple, sturdy, exactly what she'd need for work dresses that could withstand the demands of ranch life. "It's perfect. Thank you. Also got this." Cade pulled out a leather-bound journal and set it on the table. "Figured you might want to write. Letters home, or just thoughts. Whatever helps." The unexpected thoughtfulness of the gesture made Evelyn's eyes sting. "I don't know what to tell them. My family. The truth is usually a good start. The truth is that I was a fool who fell for a scam and nearly got killed because of it, that I'm now living on a stranger's ranch with no prospects and no plan." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "What kind of letter is that to send?" Cade leaned against the counter, studying her with those unreadable dark eyes. "The kind that's honest. Your family might surprise you." "You don't know my family." "No, but I know something about carrying shame that isn't yours to carry." He pushed away from the counter. "I'm going to tend the horses. There's beans and bacon in the larder if you want to make dinner. Or don't. I can cook for myself." He left before Evelyn could respond, and she was alone again in the kitchen that was slowly becoming familiar. She picked up the journal, running her hands over the smooth leather, and thought about the letters she'd need to write. "Dear Mother and Father," she composed in her head. "I am not dead, though I came close. I have no money, no prospects, and am currently dependent on the charity of a widowed rancher with ghosts in his eyes. But the sunset here is beautiful, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I might be able to breathe." She didn't write any of it down. Not yet. The words needed time to settle, to transform from raw truth into something that wouldn't cause her mother to faint and her father to book the first train west to retrieve his wayward daughter. Instead, Evelyn moved to the stove and began preparing dinner, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. The beans needed soaking she didn't have time for, but she could make do. Bacon sliced and fried, a simple pan bread from flour and water, coffee that would hopefully taste better than whatever Cade had been drinking. When he returned an hour later, drawn by the smell of food, he found the table set and dinner waiting. He stopped in the doorway, and for a moment, something complicated crossed his face. Grief, longing, fear, all tangled together. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I needed to be useful." "You keep saying that like it's a problem." Cade moved to the table and sat down, and they ate in silence. The food was simple but good, and Evelyn felt a small spark of pride at having created something nourishing from the chaos of his pantry. "This is better than anything I've made in 5 years, Cade said finally. "The bar was very low." He almost smiled. "Fair point." They finished eating, and Cade helped clear the dishes without being asked. As they worked side by side at the basin, Evelyn found herself speaking. "Mrs. Chen told me about Margaret, your wife." Cade's hand stilled in the wash water. "She say anything else?" "That I should be careful." that you're carrying guilt that isn't yours. Mrs. Chen talks too much. She cares about you. She should mind her own business." But there was no real heat in the words. Cade pulled his hands from the water and dried them on a rag. "I'm going to check the perimeter before dark. Lock the door behind me." "Why?" "Because Turner Gang's still out there, and they know someone killed 3 of their men. They'll want revenge, and this ranch is isolated enough to be a target." He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "I don't expect trouble tonight, but better safe than sorry." The reminder of danger sent ice through Evelyn's veins. She'd almost let herself forget, almost let the domestic quiet of cooking and cleaning make her believe she was safe. "How long?" she asked. "Before they come? Could be days, could be weeks, could be never." Cade checked the rifle's load with practiced efficiency. "But if they do come, you stay inside and stay down. Let me handle it. I'm not going to hide while you—" "But yes, you are." His voice was iron. "You're injured, unarmed, and untrained. You get in the middle of a gunfight, you'll just get yourself killed and make my job harder. So if trouble comes, you hide. Understand?" Evelyn wanted to argue, but the look in Cade's eyes stopped her. This wasn't negotiable. "I understand," she said quietly. He nodded and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Evelyn?" It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice did something strange to her pulse. "Yes?" "You did good today. The kitchen looks better, more lived in." He didn't turn around. "Thank you." Then he was gone into the gathering darkness, leaving Evelyn alone with the locked door and the knowledge that safety was an illusion they were both pretending to believe in. She stood at the window and watched him disappear into the shadows, rifle in hand, a solitary figure standing guard against threats that might never come. Or might arrive tomorrow. Or might already be watching from the darkness beyond the lamplight. The Wyoming night pressed against the glass like something alive, and Evelyn understood with perfect clarity that she'd traded one kind of danger for another. The violence that had nearly killed her on that dusty road wasn't gone. It was just waiting, patient and inevitable, for its next chance. She touched the stitches beneath her dress and thought about courage, about survival, about the difference between the two. Somewhere in the darkness, Cade was walking the perimeter of his land, protecting what was his from those who would take it. And Evelyn was inside his house wearing a dead woman's dress, organizing a dead woman's kitchen, trying not to become another ghost haunting these empty rooms. The question wasn't whether she could survive here. The question was whether surviving would be enough, or if she wanted something more. Something she didn't yet have words for but could feel taking shape in the spaces between one breath and the next. Outside, a coyote called to the indifferent stars. Evelyn listened to its lonely song and wondered what it was searching for in all that darkness. The answer came 6 days later, not with a howl, but with gunfire. Evelyn had fallen into a rhythm during those days, her body healing slowly while her hands stayed busy transforming Cade's neglected ranch into something that resembled a home. The stitches pulled less each morning, and Mrs. Chen had pronounced her recovery remarkable during her last visit, though the older woman's eyes had held warnings Evelyn chose not to acknowledge. She'd sewn 2 work dresses from the blue cotton, simple garments that fit properly and allowed her to move without feeling like she was drowning in fabric. She'd scrubbed every surface in the main room until her hands were raw, organized the pantry with an efficiency that would have made her mother proud, and even managed to coax some life back into the sad vegetable garden behind the house. Cade watched these transformations with an expression caught between gratitude and something darker, something that looked like mourning. He worked from dawn until well past dusk, always finding one more task that needed doing, one more fence that needed mending, one more reason to avoid being inside the house that was starting to feel lived in again. They'd developed an unspoken arrangement. Evelyn would have breakfast ready when Cade came in from morning chores. They'd eat in near silence, the only sounds the clink of utensils and the occasional comment about the day's work. Then Cade would disappear until evening, and Evelyn would lose herself in the endless tasks of maintaining a household that had been neglected for far too long. Evenings were different. After dinner, they'd sometimes sit at the table while Evelyn worked on sewing projects and Cade cleaned his guns or repaired tack. The silence during these hours felt less heavy, almost comfortable, broken occasionally by small conversations that never went too deep. You never talk about Philadelphia, Cade had said one evening, his hands busy oiling a saddle. You never talk about Margaret, Evelyn had replied, threading her needle with careful precision. He'd nodded, accepting the boundary, and they'd returned to their respective silences. But on the sixth day, the silence shattered. Evelyn was in the garden, her hands buried in soil that was finally starting to look like it might support life again, when she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Not the single rider that meant Cade returning from checking the far pastures, but multiple horses moving fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. 4 riders cresting the ridge to the east, moving with purpose toward the ranch. Even at this distance, she could see the rifles across their saddles. Evelyn ran for the house, ignoring the pull of healing stitches, her heart hammering against her ribs. She burst through the door and grabbed the bell Cade had left on the shelf, the signal he'd told her to use if she saw anything wrong. She rang it hard, the harsh clang cutting through the afternoon air, then ran to the window. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could make out details, close enough to recognize the scarred face of the man she'd shot during the stagecoach attack. He'd survived, and he'd brought friends. Cade appeared from the barn at a dead run, rifle already in hand. He took one look at the approaching riders, and his face went hard as granite. "Inside!" he shouted. "Bar the door and stay away from the windows." "Cade, now!" Evelyn retreated into the house, her hands shaking as she dropped the heavy wooden bar across the door. Through the window, she watched Cade take position behind the water trough, using it as cover while he leveled his rifle at the approaching riders. They slowed as they entered rifle range, spreading out in a loose line. The scarred man sat his horse in the center, and even from inside the house, Evelyn could see the cruel smile splitting his face. "Lawson!" he called out. "We need to have us a conversation." "Nothing to talk about, Turner," Cade shouted back. "You and your boys turn around and ride out. Nobody needs to die today." Turner laughed, the sound carrying clear and cold. "See, that's where you're wrong. 3 of my boys already died, and somebody's got to pay for that. Figure it might as well be you and that little teacher you're hiding." Evelyn's breath caught. They knew. Of course they knew. In a territory this empty, secrets didn't stay secret long. "She's got nothing to do with this," Cade said, his voice steady despite the tension Evelyn could see in his shoulders. "Your quarrel's with me. My quarrel's with anyone who kills my men, and I'm thinking maybe we take that girl back with us. Make up for the trouble she caused." Turner shifted in his saddle. "What do you say, teacher? Want to come out peaceful, or do we have to burn you out?" Ice flooded Evelyn's veins. She looked around the room frantically, searching for something she could use as a weapon. Cade had taken the rifle, but there had to be something. Her eyes fell on the shotgun mounted above the door. She'd seen it there a dozen times, but never paid it much attention. Now she pulled it down with shaking hands, surprised by its weight. She had no idea if it was loaded, had no idea how to check, but holding it made her feel slightly less helpless. Outside, Cade's voice cut through the tension. "You want her, you go through me first." "Can arrange that." Turner made a gesture, and his men began to spread out wider, flanking. "Last chance, Lawson. Send her out, and maybe we let you live." "And maybe I put a bullet through your skull before you draw your next breath," Cade replied. "I've already killed 3 of you. Don't make me add 4 more to the count." For a long moment, nobody moved. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Evelyn could see heat shimmer rising from the hard-packed earth. Sweat ran down her back, and her hands were so slick on the shotgun that she nearly dropped it. Then Turner made another gesture, and everything exploded into violence. The first shot came from one of Turner's men, kicking up dirt near Cade's position. Cade returned fire instantly, and the man went down clutching his shoulder. The other riders scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and scrub brush, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire. Evelyn dropped to the floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Bullets thudded into the house's wooden walls, and one punched through the window above her head, sending glass raining down like deadly snow. She crawled toward the back of the room, dragging the shotgun with her, every instinct screaming at her to hide, to make herself small, to survive. Through the broken window, she could hear the crack of Cade's rifle, measured and precise even in the chaos. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, and it was only a matter of time before the back door exploded inward. Evelyn screamed, spinning to see one of Turner's men filling the doorway, his gun already rising. Time seemed to slow, crystallizing into perfect clarity. She could see the stubble on his jaw, the gold tooth when he grinned, the dark bore of the pistol aimed at her chest. Her hands moved without conscious thought, bringing up the shotgun, her finger finding the trigger. The weapon kicked hard enough to knock her backward, the roar deafening in the enclosed space, and the man flew back through the doorway like he'd been hit by a locomotive. Evelyn stared at the empty doorway, at the smear of blood on the frame, at her own hand still gripping the smoking shotgun. She'd killed him. Actually killed him. The reality of it sat in her stomach like a stone. No time to process it. Another figure appeared at the window, this one climbing through. Evelyn swung the shotgun toward him, pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. Empty. The weapon was empty. The man grinned and leveled his pistol. Then Cade was there, appearing from nowhere, tackling the intruder backward through the window. They hit the ground outside in a tangle of limbs, and Evelyn heard the sickening crack of bone against rock. She scrambled to the broken window, still clutching the useless shotgun, and saw Cade grappling with the man in the dirt. They rolled, trading brutal punches, each fighting with the desperate strength of men who knew only one of them would walk away. Cade managed to get on top, his hands around the other man's throat, squeezing. The man's face turned purple, his legs kicking frantically, and then he went still. Cade rolled off him, gasping for air, blood running from a cut above his eye. He staggered to his feet, searching for his rifle. And that's when Evelyn saw Turner stepping out from behind the barn, his gun aimed at Cade's unprotected back. "Cade!" she screamed. He spun, but too slow, always too slow. Turner's finger tightened on the trigger, and Evelyn knew with crystalline certainty that she was about to watch Cade die. The shot rang out, impossibly loud. But Cade didn't fall. Turner did, clutching his leg and screaming curses that would have made Evelyn faint a week ago. Mrs. Chen stood at the edge of the property, a rifle still smoking in her hands, her face set in lines of absolute determination. Behind her, her husband sat astride his horse, also armed, also ready. "That's enough," Mrs. Chen called out, her voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. "Next person who raises a weapon gets it in the chest, not the leg." Turner's remaining man, the one Cade had shot in the shoulder during the opening exchange, immediately dropped his pistol and raised his good hand in surrender. "You're outnumbered and outmatched," Mr. Chen added, his own rifle trained on Turner. "Smart thing would be to cut your losses and ride out while you still can." Turner clutched his bleeding leg, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This ain't over, Lawson. You hear me? This ain't—" "It's over when I say it's over," Cade interrupted, retrieving his rifle and training it on Turner's head. "And right now, I'm saying you've got exactly 1 minute to get on your horse and disappear before I put you down like the rabid dog you are." For a moment, Turner looked like he might argue. Then he saw something in Cade's eyes, something cold and final. And whatever he found there made him reconsider. He let his remaining man help him into the saddle, both of them wounded and bloody, their confidence shattered. "This territory is too small for both of us," Turner spat as he gathered his reins. "You remember that." "Then I suggest you find somewhere else to be," Cade replied, "because I'm not going anywhere." Turner and his man rode out, their horses moving at a pained trot. Behind the barn, the man Evelyn had shot lay still, and the one Cade had strangled stared at the sky with empty eyes. 2 more bodies to add to the count. 2 more ghosts for this land to swallow. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the empty shotgun clattering from her nerveless fingers. Her whole body was shaking so badly she couldn't have stood if her life depended on it. The door opened, the front door this time, and Cade appeared, blood still running down his face, his shirt torn and filthy. He looked at her sitting there on the floor, looked at the shotgun, looked at the blood on the doorframe, and something shifted in his expression. "You killed him," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. Cade moved to her slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse, and crouched down in front of her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Look at me, Evelyn." She forced her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there wasn't judgment or disgust. It was understanding, tinged with something that might have been respect. "You did what you had to do," Cade said. "He came through that door to kill you. You defended yourself, that's all." "I killed a man," Evelyn whispered, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that tore from somewhere deep in her chest. "I killed him, and I don't even know his name." Cade pulled her against him, and she buried her face in his bloody shirt and cried, like she hadn't cried since she was a child. He held her through it, one hand awkward on her back, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy, but unwilling to let her fall apart alone. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with quick, assessing eyes. "Let me see to that cut on your head," she said to Cade. "And then we need to deal with the bodies before they start to smell." The practical words cut through Evelyn's tears. She pulled back, swiping at her wet cheeks, trying to regain some shred of composure. "I'm sorry," she managed. "Nothing to be sorry for," Mrs. Chen said briskly. "First time's always the hardest. After that, it gets easier. Whether that's good or bad, I'll let you decide." She moved to the basin and began pumping water. "Now, Cade, sit down and let me clean that wound before it gets infected." Cade hesitated, his eyes still on Evelyn. "You gonna be all right?" She nodded, not entirely sure it was true, but needing him to believe it. He squeezed her shoulder once, briefly, then moved to the table and let Mrs. Chen fuss over him. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, forcing her shaking legs to support her weight. Through the broken window, she could see Mr. Chen beginning the grim work of dealing with the dead. The man she'd killed. The man Cade had strangled. 2 more casualties of a violence that seemed endless. "They'll be back," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Turner won't let this go." "Probably not," Cade agreed, wincing as Mrs. Chen dabbed at his cut with something that clearly stung. "But he's wounded now, and he's lost half his gang. It'll take time for him to regroup, gather more men. We've got a window." "A window for what?" Cade met her eyes. "To decide if you want to stay or run. Because if you stay, this is what your life looks like now. Violence and fear, and never knowing if today's the day they come back. And if I run, then you run. No judgment. I'll take you to Clearwater myself, help you get on the eastbound stage, and you can put all of this behind you." His voice was carefully neutral. "It's your choice, Evelyn, but you need to make it with your eyes open." As Evelyn looked around the kitchen that she'd cleaned and organized, at the table where they'd shared quiet dinners, at the garden she'd coaxed back to life. She thought about Philadelphia, about the suffocating propriety and careful manners and life mapped out in advance like a railroad schedule. Then she looked at Cade, at the blood drying on his face and the exhaustion in his eyes, and the way he was trying so hard to give her an escape without making her feel obligated to take it. "I'm staying," she said. Mrs. Chen's hands stilled in their work. Cade's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or fear, or both tangled together. "You sure?" he asked. "No," Evelyn admitted, "but I'm not running anymore. I'm done being the kind of person who runs when things get hard. This isn't just hard, Evelyn. This is dangerous, deadly." "I know. I just killed a man." Her voice didn't shake. "I know exactly what I'm choosing." Cade studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we're doing this properly. I'm teaching you to shoot, reload, maintain a weapon. You're learning to ride well enough to run if you need to, and you're listening when I tell you to take cover." "I can agree to that." "And you're sleeping with a loaded pistol under your pillow from now on." Evelyn nodded, accepting this new reality where sleep came armed and death waited just beyond the lamplight. "Mrs. Chen finished bandaging Cade's head and stepped back, her face troubled. "You're both fools," she said quietly. "But I suppose someone has to be, or this territory would never get civilized." She gathered her supplies. "I'll send my husband back tomorrow to help repair the damage, and I'll spread word in town about what happened here. People need to know Turner Gang's getting bolder." After the Chens left, Evelyn and Cade set about securing the house. They boarded up the broken windows with planks from the barn, reinforced the doors with additional bars, and moved furniture to create defensive positions. They worked in silence, the enormity of what had happened settling over them like dust. It was full dark by the time they finished. Cade built up the fire in the stove and put coffee on to boil, while Evelyn swept up the glass and blood, trying to erase the physical evidence of violence even though the memories would never wash clean. "You should sleep in the bedroom tonight," Cade said, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "I'll stay out here. Keep watch." "You need rest, too." "I'll rest when I'm sure we're secure." He handed her one of the cups. "Besides, I'm not likely to sleep much anyway." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into her cold fingers. "Does it get easier? The killing?" Cade was quiet for a long time, staring into his own coffee like it held answers. It gets familiar, he said finally. You learn to live with it. But easier? No, it just becomes part of who you are. Who did you have to kill? The question came out before Evelyn could stop it. Before today, I mean. Before the Turner gang. Cade's jaw tightened. The war. After the war. Times when it was kill or be killed, and I chose to kill. He set down his cup with deliberate care. I came west to get away from that. Thought the frontier would give me a fresh start, a chance to be something other than a man with blood on his hands. But violence follows some people. I guess I'm one of them. And Margaret? She couldn't live with that? She couldn't live with a lot of things. The violence was just one item on a long list. Cade's voice was flat. She wanted a husband who smiled, who laughed, who could pretend the past didn't exist. I couldn't be that person. Tried for a while, but pretending just made it worse. Evelyn thought about the photograph she'd found, about the serious-faced woman standing next to a younger, harder version of Cade. Did you love her? I thought I did. But I think what I really loved was the idea of being someone who could love something gentle and good, of being redeemed by a woman's devotion. He laughed bitterly. Turns out redemption doesn't work that way. You can't love your way out of violence. It just drags everyone down with you. Is that what you think will happen? If I stay? Evelyn set down her cup and moved closer. That I'll get dragged down? I think you already have been. You killed a man today, Evelyn. That changes you. There's no going back from it. Maybe I don't want to go back. Maybe forward is the only direction that makes sense anymore. She reached out and touched the bandage on his head, the contact brief but deliberate. You saved my life today. Again. And I saved yours. That has to count for something. Cade caught her hand, his calloused fingers rough against her skin. It counts, but it doesn't change the facts. I'm a violent man in a violent territory, and being near me makes you a target. Being a woman alone in Wyoming makes me a target regardless. Evelyn didn't pull her hand away. At least this way, I'm a target with a reason to fight back. They stood there in the firelight, hands touching, both of them marked by blood and exhaustion and choices that couldn't be unmade. Outside, the Wyoming night pressed close, full of dangers seen and unseen, and somewhere in the darkness, Turner was nursing his wounds and planning revenge. But inside the ranch house, with its boarded windows and reinforced doors, two people who'd survived the unsurvivable stood together and refused to break. Get some sleep, Cade said finally, releasing her hand. Tomorrow we start training properly. If you're staying, you need to know how to defend this place. Evelyn nodded and moved toward the bedroom, then paused at the door. Cade? Thank you for giving me the choice. Most men wouldn't. Most men are fools, he replied. Now get some rest. Morning comes early. Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it, her whole body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. She changed into the nightdress Mrs. Chen had provided, extinguished the lamp, and climbed into bed. True to Cade's instruction, she placed the loaded pistol he'd given her under the pillow, the weight of it a strange comfort. Through the thin walls, she could hear Cade moving around, checking locks, loading weapons, preparing for dangers that might come in the night or might wait for dawn. The sound should have frightened her, should have reinforced just how precarious her situation had become. Instead, they made her feel less alone. She closed her eyes and tried not to see the man she'd killed, tried not to hear the sound the shotgun had made, tried not to remember the way his body had flown backward like something made of straw instead of flesh and bone. But the images came anyway, relentless and unforgiving, and Evelyn lay in the darkness and learned what it meant to carry death inside you where it could never be washed away. Sometime near midnight, she heard Cade begin to pace, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Back and forth, a caged animal unable to rest. She understood the impulse. Rest meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. The frontier had taught them both that lesson well. Evelyn touched the pistol under her pillow and wondered if she'd ever sleep unarmed again, ever feel truly safe again, ever be the girl who'd left Philadelphia with dreams of teaching and freedom and a future bright with possibility. That girl was dead, killed alongside the man in the doorway. What remained was someone harder, someone who'd looked death in the face and pulled the trigger. Someone who'd chosen to stay in hell rather than run back to a heaven that had never really wanted her. Someone who was finally terribly, learning what it meant to survive. Dawn broke cold and gray, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Evelyn woke to the sound of Cade already moving outside, his boots crunching on gravel as he made his rounds. She'd barely slept, her dreams fractured by gunfire and blood, and now her body ached with an exhaustion that went bone deep. She rose anyway, splashing cold water on her face from the basin, braiding her hair with fingers that still trembled slightly when she let them. The pistol went into the pocket of her dress, a weight she was learning to carry the way other women carried handkerchiefs or prayer books. Cade was at the well when she emerged, drawing water for the horses. His face looked drawn in the pale light, shadows under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent watching for threats that hadn't materialized. "Coffee's on," he said without looking at her. "We start training after breakfast." They ate in silence, the food tasteless in Evelyn's mouth, despite her efforts to make it palatable. The events of yesterday hung between them like smoke, impossible to ignore but too thick to see through clearly. "Your first lesson," Cade said, pushing back from the table, "is understanding that everything can be a weapon. Your surroundings, your environment, your opponent's assumptions. The gun is just the most obvious choice." He spent the next hour teaching her to truly see the ranch, where cover existed, which angles provided the best defensive positions, how to move between buildings using dead space that couldn't be observed from common approach routes. It was like learning a new language, one spoken in sightlines and kill zones and fields of fire. "Here," Cade said, leading her to a position behind the water trough. "This is where I was yesterday when they came. Good cover, clear view of the approach, and if you have to fall back, you've got the house at your back with that reinforced door." Evelyn studied the position, committing it to memory. What if they come from multiple directions? Then you're in trouble, which is why you don't fight unless you have to. Cade moved to show her another position. "Your job isn't to win a gunfight. It's to survive long enough for help to arrive or for them to decide you're too much trouble." That's a cheerful thought. It's a realistic one. He turned to face her fully. "Yesterday you got lucky. That man came through the door alone, giving you time to react. Next time might be different. You need to be ready for different." They spent the rest of the morning on weapons training. Cade showed her how to properly hold a pistol, how to aim using the sights instead of pointing and hoping, how to control her breathing so the shaking in her hands didn't translate to wild shots. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it," he instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of bottles he'd set up on a fence post. "Smooth, steady pressure. The shot should almost surprise you." Evelyn tried, failed, tried again. The pistol bucked in her hand with each shot, the recoil traveling up her arm. Most of her bullets went wide, kicking up dirt harmlessly. "You're anticipating the recoil," Cade said. "Flinching before you shoot. Stop thinking about what happens after you pull the trigger and focus on what happens before." She tried to follow his advice, steadying her breathing, letting the world narrow to just her, the gun, and the target. The next shot shattered a bottle, glass exploding in a spray that caught the weak sunlight. "Better," Cade said, and Evelyn felt a small flicker of pride despite the grim circumstances that made this training necessary. They practiced until her arms ached and her ears rang from the gunfire. Then Cade moved on to teaching her how to reload quickly, how to clear a jam, how to maintain the weapon so it wouldn't fail when her life depended on it. "Treat your gun better than you treat yourself," he said, "because it's the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave." By the time they broke for lunch, Evelyn's hands were blistered and her shoulder bruised from the rifle's kick, but she could hit a target more often than she missed. It wasn't skill, not yet, but it was competence, and competence might be enough to keep her alive. Mrs. Chen arrived in the early afternoon with bread and news from town. She took one look at Evelyn's blistered hands and bruised shoulder and shook her head. "Pushing yourself too hard," she said, applying salve to the raw skin. "You're still healing from being shot yourself, or have you forgotten?" "Can't afford to take it slow," Evelyn replied. "Not with Turner still out there." "Turner's holed up at the old Barker place, nursing his wounded leg and his wounded pride," Mrs. Chen said. "My husband heard it from the blacksmith, who heard it from a drifter passing through. Word is he's trying to recruit more men, but most folks are smart enough to stay clear after what happened here." "Most folks," Cade echoed from where he stood by the window. "What about the ones who aren't smart?" There's always a few willing to throw their lives away for the promise of easy money. Mrs. Chen finished bandaging Evelyn's hands. Sheriff in Clearwater sent word he's coming out tomorrow to take statements. He's also bringing a deputy, so you'll have extra eyes for a few hours at least. That's something, Cade said, though his tone suggested he didn't put much faith in the law's ability to protect them. After Mrs. Chen left, the afternoon stretched long and tense. Cade went back to ranch work that couldn't be delayed, fences that needed mending, a sick horse that needed tending. Evelyn tried to lose herself in domestic tasks, but her mind kept circling back to the violence, to the blood on her hands, to the terrible certainty that yesterday was just a preview of worse to come. She was kneading bread dough when the sound of approaching horses made her freeze. Her hand went automatically to the pistol in her pocket, and she moved to the window with her heart hammering. 2 riders, both wearing badges that caught the afternoon sun. The sheriff and his deputy, arriving a day early. Cade emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. He spoke with the lawmen for several minutes while Evelyn watched from the window, trying to read their body language. Finally, Cade gestured toward the house, and the 3 men headed her direction. The sheriff was a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a handlebar mustache that would have looked ridiculous on anyone else. His deputy was younger, nervous-looking, his hand hovering near his gun like he expected trouble to erupt at any moment. "Miss Harper," the sheriff said, removing his hat as he entered. "Name's Tom Brewster. This here's Deputy Collins. We need to ask you some questions about the stagecoach attack and what happened here yesterday." Evelyn gestured to the table. "Would you like coffee?" "That'd be mighty kind." She poured while Cade leaned against the wall, his presence a silent support. The sheriff pulled out a small notebook and a pencil, licking the tip before beginning. "Start from the beginning, if you would. When did you first realize the stagecoach was being attacked?" Evelyn told the story, forcing herself to relive every detail. The sheriff listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his face revealing nothing. When she got to the part where Cade had saved her, Brewster's eyes flicked to the rancher with something that might have been respect. "And yesterday's attack," he said. "Walk me through that." She did, including the part where she'd killed the man who came through the back door. Her voice stayed steady, but her hand shook slightly around her coffee cup. "That'd be Jake Morrison," Brewster said. "Small-time thief. Too stupid to know when he was out of his depth. No loss to the world, if you want my honest opinion." He closed his notebook. "Far as I'm concerned, both shootings were clear self-defense. You'll get no trouble from the law." "What about Turner?" Cade asked. "You planning to bring him in?" Brewster sighed, suddenly looking older. Planning to and being able to are different things. Turner's got friends in places I don't, and he's careful to keep just enough distance that I can't touch him without more evidence than we've got. The Barker place is outside my jurisdiction, and the county sheriff's office has bigger problems to worry about. "So he just gets to keep coming after us," Evelyn said flatly. "I didn't say that." Brewster leaned forward. "I'm telling you the official position, which is that my hands are tied. Unofficially, if someone were to solve the Turner problem in a way that looked like self-defense, well, I'd be inclined to accept that explanation without digging too deep." The implication hung heavy in the air. The sheriff was giving them permission to kill Turner if the opportunity arose, washing his hands of the moral complexity by cloaking it in legal language. "Understood," Cade said. "Good." Brewster stood, settling his hat back on his head. "One more thing. There's been talk in town about you 2 living out here together. No chaperone, no propriety. Some of the church ladies are working themselves into a state about it." "Let them talk," Evelyn said. "I've got bigger concerns than gossip." "I'm sure you do, but gossip has a way of becoming action in a small town. Just thought you should know." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You need anything, more ammunition, supplies, whatever, you send word. I can't give you deputies to stand guard, but I can make sure you're not fighting with empty guns." After the lawmen left, Evelyn stood at the window and watched them ride away, disappearing into the vast landscape like pebbles dropped into an ocean. "He's right about the talk," Cade said quietly. "It'll only get worse the longer you stay here." "And what would you have me do? Leave? Give Turner exactly what he wants?" "I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to understand what you're sacrificing. Your reputation, your standing in the community, any chance of a normal life. He moved to stand beside her. Once that's gone, you can't get it back. I had a normal life in Philadelphia. It nearly suffocated me. Evelyn turned to face him. Maybe I don't want normal anymore. Maybe I want something real, even if it's hard and dangerous and destroys whatever's left of my reputation. Cade studied her face like he was searching for cracks in her resolve. You say that now. But when winter comes and we're snowed in for weeks at a time, when the loneliness starts to eat at you, when you realize you've burned every bridge that could have led you back to civilization, then I'll live with those choices, Evelyn interrupted, just like you live with yours. We're not so different, Cade. We both came west running from something. The only difference is I'm just figuring out what I'm running toward. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful walls he kept around himself. And what's that? What are you running toward? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I know it's here. In this place, this life, this... She gestured vaguely at the space between them. Whatever this is. Cade looked away, jaw tight. This is survival. Nothing more. Is it? Because it feels like something else to me. Then you're seeing things that aren't there. But his voice lacked conviction. Evelyn wanted to push, to force him to acknowledge what was growing between them in the spaces between violence and quiet domesticity. But she could see the fear in his eyes, the terror of losing someone else to this brutal land, and she understood that pushing would only make him retreat further. All right, she said softly. We'll call it survival. For now. The next few days fell into a new rhythm, one dictated by constant vigilance and the knowledge that peace was temporary at best. Evelyn continued her weapons training, her accuracy improving until she could consistently hit targets at 20 yards. Cade taught her to ride properly, not the side saddle nonsense she'd learned as a girl, but real riding, the kind that would let her cover ground quickly if she needed to run. They worked side by side during the days, Cade on ranch maintenance, Evelyn on the endless tasks of keeping a household functioning. But there was a new awareness between them now, a charged tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the way his hand would linger when he helped her down from a horse, or the way she'd catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Mrs. Chen noticed during one of her visits, her knowing eyes missing nothing as she watched them move around each other like dancers learning a complicated step. You're playing with fire, she said to Evelyn while Cade was out checking the perimeter. Both of you. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're two lonely people confusing survival instinct with something deeper. Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. When the danger passes, and it will eventually, you'll have to figure out what's real and what's just adrenaline and proximity. And if it is real, then you'll have other problems to worry about, like how to build a life together when neither of you knows how to let someone that close without running. She squeezed Evelyn's hand. I'm not saying don't try. I'm saying go into it with your eyes open. That night, Evelyn sat at the table working on mending while Cade cleaned his rifle. The lamplight painted everything in warm gold, and for a moment it was possible to pretend they were just two people sharing a quiet evening instead of two survivors waiting for the next attack. Tell me about the war, Evelyn said, breaking the comfortable silence. Cade's hand stilled on the rifle. Why? Because I want to understand. You said violence follows you. I want to know why. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down the rifle and leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. I was 17 when I enlisted. Thought it would be glorious, thought I'd come home a hero. His laugh was bitter. I came home all right, but there was nothing glorious about it. Just mud and blood and boys dying in ditches calling for their mothers. What did you do? In the war? Killed people. Burned homes. Followed orders even when those orders made me sick. He rubbed a hand across his face. There was this one day near the end. We'd been ordered to clear out a town that was supposedly harboring enemy fighters. But when we got there, it was just civilians. Old men, women, children. Our commander said to do it anyway, said they were all guilty by association. Evelyn's hands had stopped their mending, her full attention on Cade's haunted face. Some of the men refused. Got court-martialed for it later, but they refused. I wasn't one of them. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. I did what I was told, and I've been carrying those faces with me every day since. You were following orders. You were a soldier. That's what I told myself for a long time, but it doesn't wash the blood off. Doesn't make those children any less dead. He met her eyes. That's what I mean when I say violence follows me. It's not just that I'm capable of it. It's that I've proven I can do terrible things and still sleep at night. And once you know that about yourself, you can never unknow it. Evelyn set down her mending and moved to sit across from him. You're not that person anymore. Aren't I? Yesterday I strangled a man with my bare hands and felt nothing but relief when he stopped moving. A week ago, I shot 3 men and the only thing I regretted was wasting ammunition. He shook his head. I'm exactly that person. I've just gotten better at hiding it. Or maybe you've gotten better at directing it, using it to protect instead of destroy. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand covering his. You saved my life, twice. You've taken in a stranger and asked nothing in return. Those aren't the actions of a monster. They're the actions of someone trying to atone. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, the why matters less than the what. You could have ridden past that burning stagecoach. You could have left me to die. You could have turned me away when I showed up wounded and desperate. But you didn't. That counts for something. Cade turned his hand over, his rough palm against hers. You're too forgiving. I killed a man 5 days ago, and I'm still here, still functioning, still trying to build something out of the wreckage. She squeezed his hand. Maybe we both deserve a little forgiveness. They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, 2 people trying to carry impossible weight and learning they might be able to bear it better together. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the boarded windows, a reminder that the world beyond their small circle of light was still dangerous, still unforgiving. But inside, for this moment, there was warmth and understanding, and the fragile beginning of something that might become trust if they could survive long enough to nurture it. You should get some sleep, Cade said eventually, though he didn't pull his hand away. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll trade off. Evelyn, we trade off, she said firmly. You can't protect this place if you're dead on your feet from exhaustion. Let me help carry the burden. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. 4 hours. Not a minute more. Evelyn went to bed but didn't sleep, her mind too full of everything they'd said and left unsaid. She could hear Cade moving around outside, his footsteps a steady rhythm that was becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness, danger waited, patient and inevitable. But so did morning, and the chance to wake up and try again, and the possibility that surviving might eventually transform into something that looked like living. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to Cade gently shaking her shoulder, his face drawn with exhaustion. Your watch, he said quietly. Evelyn rose and dressed quickly, taking the rifle he handed her. Anything? Quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but that could just be my nerves. He showed her the route he'd been walking. Stay alert. If you see anything at all, wake me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. I won't. He hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder briefly before heading to the bedroom. Evelyn stepped out into the cold night, the rifle heavy in her hands, and began her patrol. The ranch looked different in darkness, familiar spaces transformed into potential threats. Every shadow could hide an attacker, every sound could signal danger. But as she walked, Evelyn found herself settling into the rhythm of it, her senses sharpening, her fear transforming into a kind of heightened awareness that was almost exhilarating. This was her home now, these buildings, this land, this dangerous, beautiful place that demanded everything and promised nothing. She would defend it not because she had to, but because she'd chosen to. Because somewhere between the stagecoach attack and yesterday's gunfight, she'd stopped running from who she was and started running toward who she could become. The hours passed slowly, marked by the movement of stars across the vast Wyoming sky. When dawn finally broke, painting the horizon in shades of rose and gold, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile for this place. But determination, purpose, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She finished her patrol and returned to the house to find Cade already awake, coffee brewing, his eyes clearer after a few hours of rest. Anything? He asked. Nothing. It was quiet. He nodded, pouring 2 cups. They stood together at the window, watching the sun climb higher, drinking their coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. Chickens emerging from their coop, horses moving restlessly in the corral, a hawk circling high overhead. "We should ride into Clearwater today," Cade said. "Stock up on supplies before Turner makes his next move. Could be our last chance for a while." "All right. Give me an hour to get ready." They prepared carefully, loading weapons and making the ranch as secure as possible before they left. Mrs. Chen would check on things while they were gone, but there was still risk in leaving the place undefended. The ride to Clearwater took them across open country that left them exposed and vulnerable. Evelyn kept her hand near her pistol the whole way, scanning the horizon for threats. But they encountered nothing except empty land and the occasional pronghorn watching them pass with liquid eyes. Clearwater was small and rough, the kind of frontier town that existed more out of stubbornness than actual necessity. The main street held a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses clinging to survival. People stared as Cade and Evelyn rode in, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. "Let them stare," Cade muttered. "They'll talk regardless of what we do." They tied their horses outside the general store and went inside. The shopkeeper, a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson, looked up from her counter and her expression immediately soured. "Mr. Lawson," she said coldly, "and Miss Harper, how unexpected to see you both." "We need supplies," Cade said, ignoring her tone. "The usual order, plus extra ammunition and some fabric for Miss Harper." Mrs. Patterson's mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that." "Excuse me?" "The Ladies' Auxiliary has decided that certain behaviors shouldn't be encouraged through commerce. We've agreed not to serve establishments that harbor immorality." For a moment, Evelyn was too shocked to speak. Then anger flooded through her, hot and cleansing. "You're refusing to sell us supplies because I'm living on Mr. Lawson's ranch? As his employee?" "Employee?" Mrs. Patterson made the word sound obscene. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Cade's hand went to Evelyn's arm, a warning. "We'll take our business elsewhere." "There's nowhere else, Mr. Lawson. The other shopkeepers have agreed. You want to live in sin, you can do it without our help." Evelyn felt her control slipping. "I was attacked, shot, nearly killed. Mr. Lawson saved my life and gave me a place to recover. If you see sin in that, the problem lies with you, not me." "A woman alone with a man is a scandal waiting to happen. Decent people have standards." Mrs. Patterson crossed her arms. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have customers who deserve my attention." Cade pulled Evelyn toward the door before she could say something they'd both regret. Outside, she was shaking with rage and humiliation, her hands clenched into fists. "How dare she?" Evelyn hissed. "How dare they all—" "Easy," Cade said quietly. "This is what I warned you about. The talk becoming action. So what do we do? Give in? Let them control our lives through economic pressure? We adapt." Cade looked down the street, his expression thoughtful. "There's a trading post 20 miles south, run by a man who doesn't care about town politics. We'll get our supplies there. That's a 40-mile round trip every time we need anything. Better than starving out of principle." He helped her back onto her horse. "Come on, let's get out of here before things get worse." But worse found them anyway, in the form of 3 men stepping out of the saloon as they prepared to ride out. One of them was Turner's wounded companion from the ranch attack, his arm still in a sling. Well, well," he drawled. "If it ain't the rancher and his whore." Cade went very still. "Walk away, Davis, while you still can." "Why should I? This is a public street. I got as much right to be here as you." Davis moved closer, his friends flanking him. "Heard you two are playing house out at that sad little ranch. Must be nice, having a woman to warm your bed after all this time alone." Evelyn saw Cade's jaw tighten, saw the violence coiling in his shoulders. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's trying to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction." "Listen to your woman, Lawson," Davis sneered, "though I reckon she's had enough experience telling men what to do. Philadelphia whore moves west, still ends up on her—" Cade moved faster than Evelyn could track, his fist connecting with Davis's jaw with a crack that echoed off the buildings. Davis went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip, and his friends scattered. "Say another word about her," Cade said, his voice deadly quiet, "and I'll finish what I started at my ranch." Davis scrambled backward, fear replacing bravado. "You're crazy. Everyone knows it." "Then you should know better than to push me." Cade turned back to his horse. "Let's go." They rode out of Clearwater at a gallop, not slowing until the town disappeared behind them. Only then did Evelyn feel safe enough to speak. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Cade's voice was tight. "There are lines, Evelyn. Things I won't tolerate. Let him talk about me however he wants, but you're under my protection. That means something." The words settled into Evelyn's chest, warm and complicated. Protection, partnership, the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet, but both could feel growing stronger with each shared danger, each quiet evening, each moment of standing together against a world determined to push them apart. They rode toward the trading post in silence, and by the time they returned to the ranch that evening, laden with supplies and bone-tired, the sun was setting in a blaze of crimson that painted the whole world in shades of blood and fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new tests of their resolve. But tonight they were home, together, and for now, that was enough. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when the moon hung fat and silver over the Wyoming landscape, turning everything into sharp contrasts of light and shadow. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. She was on her feet instantly, pistol in hand, her heart already racing. Through the window, she could see orange flames licking at the barn, the dry wood catching fast and hungry. In the firelight, she counted 5 figures moving with purpose, spreading out to surround the house. "Cade!" she shouted, but he was already emerging from his room, rifle in hand, his face grim. "Turner," he said, moving to the window. "He's finally made his move. The barn's lost. We can't save it." "I know. That's the point. He's trying to draw us out, make us choose between the house and the livestock." Cade's jaw was set. "We stay inside. Let the barn burn. The horses can break out if it gets too hot." As if in response to his words, they heard the crash of breaking wood and the panicked whinnying of horses as the animals kicked their way free of the burning structure. The figures in the yard moved to intercept them, but the terrified horses scattered in all directions, disappearing into the darkness. "Lawson!" Turner's voice carried over the roar of the flames. "I know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe I'll let you live." Cade moved to the door but stayed behind cover. "You know that's not happening, Turner. You want her. You come through me first." "Can arrange that," Turner laughed, the sound edged with something unhinged. "I brought enough men this time. You can't win, but you can die quick instead of slow. Your choice." Evelyn took up position at the side window, her hand steady on her pistol, despite the fear coursing through her veins. She'd trained for this, prepared for this, but knowing it was coming and actually facing it were vastly different things. "How many?" she asked Cade. "5 that I can see. Could be more in the shadows." He checked his ammunition. "We've got enough bullets if we make every shot count." The first volley came without warning, bullets slamming into the wooden walls and shattering the few windows they'd left unboarded. Evelyn dropped flat, covering her head as glass rained down. When she raised up to return fire, she saw one of Turner's men sprinting toward the house, torch in hand. She fired twice. The first shot missed, but the second caught him in the leg. He went down screaming, the torch falling from his hand and setting fire to the dry grass. The flames spread quickly, creating a new danger that threatened to trap them inside the burning house. "We can't stay here," Evelyn said, watching the fire creep closer. "They'll smoke us out or burn us alive." Cade's eyes were scanning the yard, calculating odds, measuring distances. "The root cellar. We can get there if we move fast. Use it as a fallback position. It's stone, won't burn, and there's only one entrance to defend." "That's also the problem. Only one entrance means only one escape." "You got a better idea?" Evelyn didn't. The fire was spreading faster now, feeding on the tinder dry grass and creeping toward the house. In minutes, they'd be surrounded by flames with nowhere to run. "On 3, Cade said. "We go out the back, stay low, head for the cellar. I'll cover us. You just run." "I can shoot while I run." "Evelyn, we do this together or not at all." She met his eyes. I'm not hiding while you take all the risk. Not anymore. Something fierce and proud flashed across Cade's face. All right, together. 1, 2, 3. They burst through the back door into chaos and smoke and gunfire. Evelyn ran in a crouch, firing at shapes in the darkness, while Cade laid down covering fire that sent Turner's men diving for cover. Bullets whined past her head, close enough that she could feel the displacement of air, but she kept moving, kept firing. Her whole world narrowed to the next step and the next shot. They made it to the cellar entrance just as the house caught fire, flames erupting from the dry wooden walls with a roar that sounded almost alive. Cade yanked open the heavy door and they tumbled inside, pulling it shut behind them and dropping the iron bar into place. The cellar was small and dark, the air cool and damp. Evelyn could hear her own breathing, harsh and ragged, mixing with Cade's. Above them, footsteps thundered as Turner's men searched for them. "They're in the cellar," someone shouted. "They went to ground." "Then we dig them out," Turner's voice closer now. "Or we wait. They gotta come out eventually, and when they do, we'll be waiting." Cade was already moving in the darkness, his hands finding supplies by memory. "There's water down here, food, ammunition. We can last longer than they think." "But not forever." Evelyn's eyes were adjusting to the dim light filtering through cracks in the door. "And eventually someone's going to think to just block the door and leave us to suffocate." "They won't get the chance." Cade was loading weapons with practiced efficiency. "Because we're not waiting to be rescued. We're going on the offensive." "How?" "They're up there, we're down here, and the moment we open that door, there's another way out. A ventilation shaft that opens behind the water trough. It's narrow, barely wide enough for one person, but it comes out far enough from the house that we might be able to use it." Evelyn looked at the darkness, at the back of the cellar, where Cade was pointing. "You want us to crawl through a tunnel while they're up there waiting to shoot us?" "I want one of us to crawl through while the other creates a distraction." He met her eyes in the dim light. "I'll go through the shaft, come up behind them. You stay here, make noise, make them think we're both still trapped. When you hear my signal, you come out fighting." "That's suicide. You'll be alone out there against 5 men. 4. You shot one, remember?" His smile was grim. "And I've faced worse odds." "Not alone you haven't. Not since—" Evelyn caught herself, but Cade finished the thought. "Not since Margaret died. You're right." He reached out and cupped her face, his calloused palm rough against her cheek. "But I'm not alone anymore. I've got you watching my back, and that makes all the difference." Before Evelyn could respond, before she could tell him all the things that had been building in her chest for weeks, Cade kissed her. It was brief and fierce and tasted of smoke and desperation, a promise and a goodbye wrapped into one gesture. Then he pulled back, grabbed his rifle, and disappeared into the darkness at the back of the cellar. Evelyn stood frozen for a heartbeat, her fingers touching her lips, her mind reeling. Then training kicked in and she moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood to listen. Voices above. Movement. The crackle of fire consuming what was left of her home. She waited, counting seconds, trying to gauge how long it would take Cade to navigate the narrow shaft and emerge behind their attackers. She didn't have to wait long. A shout of alarm from outside, followed by gunfire, told her Cade had made his move. Evelyn grabbed the iron bar and threw it aside, then kicked open the cellar door and came up shooting. The scene was chaos. Cade had emerged behind 2 of Turner's men and taken them down before they knew he was there. The remaining 2, including Turner himself, had taken cover and were returning fire. And in the firelight, Evelyn could see a 6th man she'd missed earlier, circling around to flank Cade's position. She didn't think, just aimed and fired, the pistol bucking in her hand. The 6th man went down, and suddenly the odds had shifted. 3 against 2, with Cade and Evelyn holding defensive positions and Turner's men caught in the open. "Fall back," Turner shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Fall back to the horses!" But Cade was already moving, using the smoke and confusion for cover, cutting off their retreat. Evelyn saw him rise from behind the water trough like something out of a nightmare, his rifle tracking Turner with cold precision. "It's over," Cade said, his voice carrying across the burning yard. "Drop your weapons." Turner's remaining man did so immediately, his hands shooting into the air. But Turner himself just laughed, a sound devoid of any humor, and raised his pistol. "You think I'm going to let you take me alive?" Let them hang me like a dog in front of the whole territory? He was bleeding from a wound in his side, swaying on his feet, but still dangerous. No, I'm going out my way, and I'm taking you with me. Time seemed to slow. Evelyn saw Turner's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Cade begin to bring his rifle to bear, saw the mathematics of violence play out in fractions of seconds. She fired. The shot caught Turner in the chest, high and center, the impact spinning him backward. His pistol discharged harmlessly into the dirt, and then he was falling, collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. Evelyn walked forward on legs that didn't feel entirely steady, her pistol still trained on Turner's prone form. She could see his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths, blood spreading dark across his shirt. Turner's eyes found hers, and what she saw there wasn't rage or hatred, but something almost like relief. "Knew you had it in you," he wheezed. "Saw it that day on the road. You got the look of someone who'll do what needs doing." "I'm nothing like you," Evelyn said quietly. "No?" Turner coughed, blood flecking his lips. "You killed to survive, just like me. Only difference is you tell yourself it's justified." His breathing was getting more labored. "We're all just trying to survive out here. Some of us are just more honest about what that takes." Then his eyes went flat and empty, and whatever argument he'd been making died with him. Evelyn stood over his body, the pistol still in her hand, and waited to feel something. Triumph, relief, guilt, anything. But there was only a vast emptiness where emotion should have been, a hollow space carved out by violence and necessity. Cade appeared at her side, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I don't know." Evelyn looked at the burning barn, the scorched house, the bodies scattered across the yard. "Is this what winning looks like?" "Sometimes." Cade turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You saved my life. Again. That counts for something." "I killed a man. Again." Her voice was flat. "When does it stop counting? How many deaths before I become the thing I was running from?" "You're not a killer, Evelyn. You're a survivor. There's a difference." "Is there?" Because right now it feels like the same thing. In the distance, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Many horses moving fast. Evelyn tensed, raising her pistol again, but Cade shook his head. "That'll be the sheriff. Mrs. Chen saw the smoke, must have sent word." He gently lowered her gun hand. "It's over. Really over this time." Sheriff Brewster arrived with 6 deputies, all of them armed and ready for a fight. When they saw the bodies and the burning buildings, Brewster let out a low whistle. "Looks like you folks had yourselves quite an evening," he said, dismounting. "Anyone hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal," Cade replied. "Turner and his gang came to finish what they started. We finished it instead." Brewster walked among the bodies, his face showing no emotion. "That's Turner, all right. And his crew. Well, this solves several problems at once." He turned back to Cade and Evelyn. "Far as I'm concerned, this was clear self-defense. You'll need to give statements, but I don't anticipate any legal complications." One of the deputies was already organizing the grim work of dealing with the dead. Another was trying to contain what was left of the fires, though both the barn and half the house were already lost causes. Mrs. Chen arrived as dawn was breaking, her face drawn with worry. She took one look at Evelyn's blood-spattered dress and soot-blackened face and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I thought we'd lost you," she whispered. "When I saw those flames, I thought—" "We're alive," Evelyn said, and hearing the words out loud made them feel more real. "We survived." "You did more than survive, you won." Mrs. Chen pulled back, studying Evelyn's face. "But winning has a cost. How are you holding up?" "Ask me again in a few days. Right now, I'm too numb to know." The sun climbed higher, painting the devastation in harsh morning light. The barn was gone, reduced to smoking rubble. Half the house was destroyed, the rest too damaged to be safely habitable. The corral fences were burned, supplies ruined, months of work undone in a single night of violence. Cade stood in the middle of it all, surveying the damage with an unreadable expression. Evelyn moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "We can rebuild," she said quietly. "We?" He looked at her. "After everything that's happened, you still want to stay?" "Where else would I go? This is home now, for better or worse." She gestured at the ruins. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't build the kitchen next to the gun oil again. The corner of Cade's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Might take months to get this place livable again. Then we have months to figure out what we're building, and I don't just mean the house. Evelyn met his eyes. Earlier, in the cellar, you kissed me. I did. He didn't look away. Figured if I was going to die, I should at least be honest about what I wanted. And what do you want? Cade was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. I want to stop being afraid. Of caring, of losing, of letting someone close enough to hurt me. I want to believe that maybe we can build something here that isn't just about survival. We can, Evelyn said. If we're willing to try. It won't be easy. The town already thinks the worst of you for staying here. If this becomes something more, let them think what they want. Evelyn's voice was firm. I didn't survive everything I've survived to live by someone else's rules. I choose you, Cade. I choose this place, this life, whatever we can build from the ashes. If that makes me a scandal, so be it. Cade reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to how things were. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, with you. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, and Evelyn let herself sink into the embrace. They stood together in the ruins of the ranch. Two people who'd been broken and battered by the frontier, but had somehow found strength in each other. We should get married, Cade said suddenly. Proper. With witnesses and everything, give the town nothing to gossip about except how respectable we are. Evelyn pulled back to look at his face. Is that a proposal? It's a practical solution. But his eyes were soft. And maybe it's also me wanting to make sure you can't change your mind and leave. I'm not leaving. She stood on her toes and kissed him. Properly this time, without the urgency of violence or the fear of death hanging over them. Just two people choosing each other in the clear light of day. But yes, we should get married, if you're asking. I'm asking. Then I'm saying yes. Mrs. Chen had been watching from a discreet distance, and now she approached with a knowing smile. About time you two stopped dancing around it. I was beginning to think you'd both die of stubbornness before admitting what was obvious to everyone else. Obvious? Cade raised an eyebrow. Please. You've been looking at each other like drowning people look at air for weeks now. The only surprise is that it took a gunfight to make you honest about it. She turned to Evelyn. You're coming to stay with us while the ranch gets rebuilt. Both of you. It's not proper otherwise, and I won't have the town using this as more ammunition against you. Mrs. Chen, no arguments. You'll stay with us, rebuild during the day, and when the ranch is livable again and you're properly married, then you can move back. Her tone brooked no disagreement. In the meantime, we'll help however we can. Supplies, labor, whatever you need. Other neighbors began arriving as the morning wore on, drawn by the smoke and the news. Some came with judgment in their eyes, clearly believing the rumors about Evelyn and Cade. But others came with offerings, food, materials, offers of help in rebuilding. The blacksmith offered to forge new ironwork at cost. A young couple who'd recently settled nearby volunteered their labor. Even some of the church ladies who'd been most critical appeared with baskets of food and carefully neutral expressions. We may not approve of everything, one of them said stiffly, but nobody deserves what happened here. We help our own, even when they're foolish. It was hardly a ringing endorsement, but it was something. A crack in the wall of judgment, small but significant. By mid-afternoon, a plan had emerged. The house would be torn down and rebuilt from the foundation up, larger and better designed. The barn would be replaced with a proper structure that could house the horses they'd need to repurchase. The fences would be reinforced, the garden expanded, the whole operation transformed from a lonely widower's neglected homestead into a real working ranch. It would take months, maybe a year, but it would be theirs, built by their own hands and the hands of people who decided they were worth helping despite their unconventional circumstances. As the neighbors dispersed to begin the initial work of clearing debris, Sheriff Brewster pulled Cade and Evelyn aside. Got a letter from the county sheriff this morning, he said. Been tracking the Turner gang for months. There's a reward. $2,000 for Turner, $500 each for his lieutenants. That's $4,000 total, belongs to you two for bringing them in. Evelyn felt her knees go weak. $4,000. A fortune. More money than she'd ever dreamed of having. That's enough to rebuild, Cade said slowly. With plenty left over. Enough to rebuild bigger, better. Maybe even hire some help so you're not working yourselves to death. Brewster handed Cade an official-looking document. Take this to the bank in Clearwater. They'll verify the claims and release the funds. Should take about a week. After the sheriff left, Evelyn and Cade stood staring at the paper like it might disappear if they looked away. $4,000, Evelyn whispered. We could do anything, go anywhere. We could go east, buy you a house in Philadelphia, live like civilized people. Cade's voice was carefully neutral. Evelyn looked at the ruins of the ranch, at the vast Wyoming sky stretching endless and blue overhead, at the mountains rising like jagged promises in the distance. Then she looked at Cade, at the man who'd saved her life and given her purpose and helped her discover strength she'd never known she possessed. Or we could stay here and build something worth fighting for, she said. Create a legacy instead of running from ghosts. Cade smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Yeah, we could do that. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, once the worst of the rebuilding was underway, and Evelyn's reputation had been somewhat salvaged by living respectably with the Chens. It was a small affair held in the Chen's parlor, with Sheriff Brewster serving as witness and Mrs. Chen crying happy tears into her handkerchief. Evelyn wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric purchased with reward money, simple but beautiful. Cade wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable in it, but his eyes when he looked at her held everything words couldn't express. Do you, Evelyn Harper, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked at Cade, at the scars and the hardness and the ghost that still haunted his eyes sometimes, and saw also the gentleness, the fierce loyalty, the man who'd chosen to save a stranger when he could have ridden past. I do, she said clearly. And do you, Cade Lawson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Cade's voice was rough but steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet and brief, appropriate for the small audience, but it held a promise of more to come. When they pulled apart, Evelyn saw tears in Cade's eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. Didn't think I'd ever do this again, he whispered. Didn't think I deserved another chance. We both deserve this, Evelyn whispered back. We've earned it. The celebration was modest but heartfelt. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and neighbors who'd come to help with the rebuilding stayed to toast the new couple. Even some of the church ladies attended, their judgment softened by the respectability of a proper wedding and the undeniable evidence that Cade and Evelyn had been trying to do things right all along. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Evelyn found herself standing outside under a sky full of stars, breathing in the cool evening air. Cade joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. Happy? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. But yes, happy too. What scares you? Everything. That I'll wake up and this will be a dream. That I'll fail at being the kind of wife you deserve. That the frontier will chew us up and spit us out like it does everyone else. She leaned into his warmth. But I'm choosing to do it anyway, choosing to believe we can make this work. We will. Cade pressed a kiss to her temple. Because we're both too stubborn to fail. They stood there in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the midst of violence and chaos, and somehow built something beautiful from the wreckage. Around them, the Wyoming night was vast and wild and full of dangers both seen and unseen. But it was also full of possibilities. The ranch rose from its ashes over the following months, transformed by hard work and determination and the unexpected generosity of a community that had decided to embrace rather than exclude. The new house was larger, better built, with real glass windows and a kitchen that Evelyn designed with meticulous care. The barn was spacious enough for a dozen horses, and the garden flourished under her attention. They bought cattle with some of the reward money, building a herd that would provide steady income, hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, created something that was more than just survival. It was a thriving operation, a real home, a life built deliberately and with purpose. Evelyn learned to ride like she'd been born to it, to shoot with accuracy that made Cade proud, to read the land and weather like a book. She also continued her education work, starting a small school in Clearwater for children whose parents couldn't afford formal tutoring. The church ladies who'd once scorned her became her biggest supporters when they saw the difference she was making. Cade learned to smile more, to let people close without fearing they'd be taken from him. The ghosts that haunted his eyes faded, though they never disappeared entirely, transformed from tormentors into reminders of how far he'd come. On a spring morning 2 years after their wedding, Evelyn stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun rise over land that was finally, truly theirs. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of new life growing inside her. Cade emerged from the barn and spotted her standing there. He crossed the yard in long strides, pulling her into his arms. "You should be resting," he said, his hand joining hers on her belly. "I've rested enough. Besides, there's too much to do." She smiled up at him. "The garden needs planting, the new foal needs training, and I have 3 students coming this afternoon for lessons. All of which can wait until after you've had breakfast and put your feet up." His tone was firm but loving. "Doctor's orders." "The doctor said I'm healthy as a horse." "The doctor also said you need to take it easy in the final months." Cade guided her back inside, settling her into a chair he'd built specifically for her comfort. "Let me take care of you for once. You've spent 2 years proving you can handle anything this land throws at you. You don't need to prove it anymore." Evelyn let herself be fussed over, accepting the breakfast Cade prepared and the cushion he insisted on placing behind her back. Through the window, she could see the ranch stretching out in all directions, the cattle grazing peacefully, the horses running in the corral, the garden starting to green with new growth. "Do you ever regret it?" Cade asked, following her gaze. "Staying here instead of going back east?" Evelyn thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind, the suffocating propriety, the carefully managed expectations, the future that had been mapped out for her by others. Then she looked at Cade, at the home they'd built, at the life growing inside her. "Not for a second," she said. "This is where I'm meant to be, where we're meant to be." A knock at the door interrupted them. Cade answered it to find Mrs. Chen standing there, her arms full of baby clothes she'd been knitting. "Thought you might need these," she said, bustling inside. "Can't have my godchild going without proper blankets." She set down her burden and pulled Evelyn into a gentle hug. "How are you feeling?" "Enormous, tired, terrified, excited," Evelyn laughed. "Everything at once." "That's motherhood in a nutshell," Mrs. Chen said with a smile. "You'll do fine. You've already survived worse than childbirth." The 3 of them sat around the table drinking coffee and talking about preparations for the baby's arrival. Outside, the ranch hummed with life and activity, a testament to what could be built when people refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. As afternoon approached and Evelyn's students began arriving for their lessons, Cade kissed her goodbye and headed out to work. She watched him go, this man who'd saved her life and given her purpose and helped her become someone stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The students settled around the table, 3 children from neighboring ranches, eager to learn despite the difficulties of frontier life. Evelyn opened her books and began the lesson, her voice steady and sure. This was her life now. Teaching and ranching, motherhood and marriage, building a future in a place that had once seemed determined to kill her. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Philadelphia with stars in her eyes and poetry in her heart. It was better. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evelyn finished her lessons and walked outside to join Cade where he was mending fence. He looked up at her approach and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "Done for the day?" he asked. "For now, though I should probably start dinner soon. Or we could sit and watch the sunset. Dinner can wait." He took her hand, guiding her to a bench he'd built overlooking the valley. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that you're real." "I'm real, we're real." Evelyn laced her fingers through his. "We survived the unsurvivable and built something beautiful from the ashes. That's our story. And it's not over yet," Cade said, his hand finding her belly again, "just beginning a new chapter." They sat together as the sun painted the world in fire. 2 people who'd been broken by violence and remade by love and partnership. The frontier stretched vast and wild around them, still dangerous, still demanding, but no longer terrifying, because they'd learned the secret that the land kept from those too afraid to listen. Survival was just the beginning. What came after? The building, the growing, the choosing to create instead of merely endure. That was where life actually happened, and they were living it, one hard-won day at a time, refusing to be anything less than everything they'd fought to become. The baby came on a warm summer night, arriving with the same stubborn determination that characterized both parents. Evelyn labored through the evening with Cade holding her hand and Mrs. Chen guiding her through, and when dawn broke, their daughter entered the world crying fierce and strong. "She's perfect," Cade whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands more accustomed to violence than tenderness. "What should we call her?" Evelyn looked at her daughter's scrunched face, at Cade's awestruck expression, at the light streaming through the window of the home they'd built together. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Because that's what they'd created here in this brutal, beautiful place. Hope for the future, hope for redemption, hope that even the most broken people could find wholeness if they were willing to fight for it. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Droughts that tested their resilience, harsh winters that strained their resources, the everyday struggles of ranch life and parenthood. But they faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthened by every hardship overcome. More children came, 2 sons who inherited their father's quiet strength and their mother's fierce intelligence. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Evelyn's school expanded, eventually becoming a proper schoolhouse that served dozens of children. And through it all, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the children asleep, Cade and Evelyn would sit together on their porch and watch the Wyoming sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Do you remember?" Evelyn said one such evening, her hair now streaked with silver, her hands marked by years of work. "When I first arrived here? How broken everything was?" "I remember thinking you wouldn't last a week," Cade admitted. "You were too soft, too civilized, too determined to impose order on chaos. And yet here we are, decades later, still imposing order on chaos." She leaned into him. "Still choosing each other." "Always choosing each other," Cade agreed. "Best decision I ever made was pulling you out of that desert. Second best was letting you stay." They'd built an empire from ashes, a family from loneliness, a legacy from desperation. The girl who'd fled Philadelphia searching for freedom and the man who'd buried his heart with his first wife had found something neither expected, not just survival, but a life worth living. As stars began to prick through the darkening sky and the distant sound of their grandchildren playing drifted on the evening air, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The violence and fear, yes, but also the courage and determination and the stubborn refusal to let circumstance dictate destiny. She'd come west running from a life that felt like slow suffocation. She'd nearly died on a dusty road, had killed to survive, had been scorned and judged and pushed to the edge of what any person should have to endure. And from all that darkness, she'd built something luminous. Not alone, never alone, but with a partner who understood that love wasn't gentle words and easy promises. Love was standing together when the world tried to tear you apart. Love was rebuilding when everything burned down. Love was choosing each other again and again, through violence and peace, through hardship and plenty, through every sunrise that promised nothing except another chance to try. The Wyoming frontier had tested them and found them unbreakable, not because they were stronger than others, but because they refused to break alone. Together, they'd transformed survival into thriving, endurance into joy, and a harsh, unforgiving land into something that finally, impossibly, felt like home. And that, more than anything else, was the victory that mattered. Not the battles won or enemies defeated, but the life they'd chosen to build in the aftermath. A life of purpose and partnership, of children and grandchildren, of a ranch that would outlive them both and stand as testament to what 2 broken people could create when they decided to be whole together. As full dark settled over the land and Cade's arm tightened around her shoulders, Evelyn closed her eyes and smiled. She'd come west, searching for freedom, and found something better. She'd found herself. And in finding herself, she'd found everything else that mattered. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But beneath their cold light, on a ranch carved from wilderness through sheer determination, two people sat together and proved that sometimes the best stories aren't about escaping the darkness. They're about learning to build a fire bright enough that the darkness doesn't matter anymore. And they'd built one hell of a fire.